I've been thinking a lot about manners and rudeness lately because it's come to my attention that a number of my patients have had incidents, either run-ins with strangers or strange things happening where people were quite rude. My first patient had an incident where he was walking down the street minding his own business when a stranger accosted him and started asking him some very impertinent personal questions. He started asking my patient about what nationality he was, where his parents came from, what religion he was, where he lived in Toronto, where he grew up. And my patient felt that he shouldn't be rude back, and so he was answering briefly, but trying not to get too involved. And finally, the gentleman just did not stop, and my patient lost his patience and said, okay, I'm going now. And when we were discussing it in our individual session, I asked him why he felt compelled to respond. And my patient said, well, I didn't want to get into an argument with him. And I think that there's a lot of that going around. I think here in Canada, we err on the side of being too polite and too nice and too accommodating. And we think that if we avoid conflict, it's better because people won't be angry at us or bad things won't happen. But I think that what happens a lot of the time is when we are conflict averse and we are afraid of confrontation, we end up engaging more in situations which are harmful or destructive or embarrassing or upsetting to us. And I think that there was a different way that my patient could have handled the stranger. And what I recommended was to practice ruthless compassion. And basically, the way I see it is that if you're practicing ruthless compassion, if someone is rude to you, then you do not need to be nice to them in return. You need to allow them to have the consequences of their rude behavior. And in the case of the accosting man who was asking impertinent questions, it would have been perfectly acceptable for my patient to say, you know, you're interrogating me and I do not feel obliged to answer any of your questions. I don't know you and you don't know me, and really this is not a way to make a connection with a stranger. If you had been friendly, if you had been open, if you had been polite and showed a genuine interest, I might be more inclined to answer your questions. But the way you're going about asking me these questions makes me feel that you're just asking me these questions to then use the information to form some kind of erroneous belief about me or to attack me, and therefore I don't feel in any way obligated to answer your questions. And I think in general, when people approach us in a rude manner, we tend to be more conciliatory, we want to back away, we don't want to get into it with them. But often I find that what that does is it simply encourages them to continue because they feel that we're weak and they feel that we're going to be accommodating, and they feel that if they just continue, they will finally prevail. Another one of my colleagues was telling me a story the other day about somebody who wouldn't take no for an answer. They wanted something from my colleague, and my colleague had said, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to do this thing for you. But somehow the person didn't register this information and was emailing and texting and telephoning my colleague and persisting in asking for that thing. And my colleague, having a backbone, said no and did not budge, but the person seem to be trying to bully them into submission. And I think that happens a lot these days. People don't want to take no for an answer, and they will push you and push you and push you in the belief that eventually you'll back down. And I think, unlike most people, my colleague didn't back down, but I think that for the most part these days, a lot of people will just say, okay, fine, here, you can have this thing, even if doing what this person, this bully wants is not good for you. And I think we have gone too far on either extreme. The rude people are too rude, and the polite people are too accommodating, too nice, too giving, too easygoing. And I think what that does is it encourages the rude people to take advantage and to exploit the people who are polite. So rather than everyone kind of being in the middle, being conscious and courteous and responsible and decent toward each other, we're getting these extremes where we have these bullies on the one end who just push you around, and then we have these conciliatory people on the other end going along with it. And sadly, the people who are being conciliatory are not getting their needs met, but just the same way, the bullies aren't getting their needs met either, because obviously, if you have to bully people, if you can't take no for an answer, if you have to ask people intrusive questions, what you're looking for does not lie in what you're getting from the other person. You know, the man on the street who was accosting my patient, whatever he was looking for, he wasn't going to get it by my patient answering his questions. And the gentleman who was bullying my colleague wasn't going to get his needs met either, even if my colleague had given him what he wanted. Because obviously these rude behaviors are driven by some deeper emotional wound that have nothing to do with getting the thing that they're asking for. So I think we're not helping the rude person if we give them what they're asking for either, because really they need to take stock of what's really driving this behavior. And ruthless compassion is really saying, I do not owe anybody anything. If somebody is asking me intrusive, impertinent questions, really they're interrogating me, and I do not have to engage with them. And if someone is trying to bully me into submission, I certainly am not obliged to back down. You know, this attitude of being passive doesn't help me, and it certainly doesn't help them to give them what they're looking for, because what they're looking for is not what they truly need. Ruthless compassion is saying, I need to take responsibility to protect myself, and I also need to accord the other person the responsibility to sort out what's really driving their behavior.